no surprise, we're in the book of Hebrews, and I'm just going to get right to get into class. We finished up chapter 8 last week, and he's talking about a new covenant compared to an old covenant, and saying, you know, if there hadn't been anything wrong with the old covenant, there wouldn't be a need for the new one. But finding fault with them, the people didn't keep the old covenant, and it didn't have the ability to forgive sins. There's no provisions for that, for actual forgiveness. So there had to be a new covenant. And at the very end of chapter 8, it says, in that he says a new covenant, he's made the first obsolete. So you don't have two covenants going at the same time. One comes in, the other one goes out. It says, now what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away. We're talking in 66, 67 AD, something along that line. Within 2 or 3 years, the nation of Israel would be destroyed. The temple would be destroyed. Everything about their worship would be destroyed. All the implements of their worship, the place for sacrifices, all of that stuff would be gone, vanished away. And the Hebrew writer says it's ready to vanish away, even as he was writing those words. So with that in mind, we go into chapter 9, going to still be talking about this covenant. He says, then indeed, even the first covenant was what? The old law. Technically, it was a covenant that God made with the people of Israel. You do this, here's all the laws. You do this, I'll bless you, I'll do all that my part. But they didn't do their part. And they actually, back then, at Mount Sinai, they agreed, yes, we will. Oh yeah, we will keep this covenant. But then they weren't able to do that. So anyway, he says, even this first covenant had ordinances. Now, what are ordinances? Laws or rules. This covenant had rules and laws of divine service. So God had made laws. Here's how I want you to serve me and the earthly sanctuary. Here's how you do it. He had them build a sanctuary and said, this is how the worship is going to go. And verse 2 says, for a tabernacle was prepared. And the for is here's why. He just said this, there's going to be ordinances it had ordinances of divine service. Here's what he's going to say, here's what I mean by these ordinances of divine service. He's going to describe that. And right here is the beginning of a long description of the first covenant. How of those divine ordinances of divine service. Here's what I mean. Here's what I'm talking about. Now, before we go to the next part, I got it grayed out because we're going to look at it in a minute, but he says a tabernacle was prepared. And so I wanted to just refresh our memories or about what the tabernacle was, and he's going to describe the worship, but I'm going to show you some pictures of it so that you'll be able to picture it better when he describes it in words. So first picture is just a picture. This is a model of the tabernacle. It really was a tent. There were several layers of covering over the tent, different kinds of materials that were specified by a divine ordinance. And God told him exactly how to build it and what to do. And this is overall what it looked like. Now, I'm going to look at a little bit in depth into the tabernacle itself, into the tent. That tent was divided into two parts, as you can see. First of all, to get into it, there was curtain. This was called the first veil, and then this one is called the second veil. And when you went inside the first veil, and only priests could do this, the high priest or any of the other priests could go in this part, but only priests could go in. The regular folks couldn't. But in there was the golden candlestick, which represented God's light, illumination, knowledge, I guess you would say. Then there was a table of showbread, which had 12 loaves of bread, and there was oil and wine. And that represented God's provisions for them. Those things had to be refreshed every single day, showing that God continually every day provides for us. And these lights had to be kept burning 24/7, all the time. They actually were fed by oil. They were oil lamps, and each lamp had a reservoir, and there was a larger reservoir that fed into that, so that they as long as they kept oil in the reservoir, that thing would burn all the time. It was supposed to never go out, which represents God's illumination never going out. Then there was the altar of incense, and there was a golden censer. You've probably seen the Pope or one of the cardinals going around with a thing on a chain, and incense burning in there and going like this and spreading the incense around. That's what a censer is. There was one there, and they would burn incense at this altar. Notice where it's placed, right as close as you can get to going into the most holy place, which is this, without actually going in. And any smoke from this would go up and over into the most holy place. And that in the New Testament, we're told the incense represents the prayers of the people going up to God as a sweet savor. God loves our prayers. He wants us to pray. And so that all had representation. And then there was the most holy place. There was a curtain here, and only one person could go in there, and that was the high priest. And he only went in once a year to offer sacrifice, first for himself and then for the people. That was called the Day of Atonement. So that was called the most holy place. To show it from a plan view a little bit better, this is the building, but outside here, there was the altar of burnt offering. That's where all the burnt offerings were done. Whenever the people would bring an offering, the priests would burn the offering there. And whenever the priests went in to minister in here, take care of the table of showbread, take care of the light and the altar of incense, keep incense burning, and the high priest would go in to make sacrifice. Before they could go in, they had to wash in the laver. The laver was a big bowl of water made out of bronze. And we don't know what size was for the tabernacle, but for the temple, when Solomon made the temple, this laver was 15 feet across and 7.5 feet deep. You think that was just to wash hands and feet? No, the priests immersed before they went in. It was symbolic of what?
Baptism.
Of baptism. First of all, when you came in, before you could go any further, there had to be a sacrifice. So when we think of the typology or this all being a type of God's, the real thing, what was the real offering?
Christ.
Jesus. When he came, he offered once and for all this offering. And then, so the sacrifice had to be made, which it was. And then for us, we have to be cleansed in the laver. That's what baptism is, before we can go into the holy place. And the holy place was a foreshadowing of the church. In the church, we have the illumination of God, God's illumination. We have the provision, God constantly providing for us. The altar of incense is our prayers going up to God. And only priests could go in there, but we are now, Peter says, he has made us a kingdom of priests. We are priests. We now can go directly to God ourselves. And so this represents a church. That's the holy place. And this is the most holy place, or the holiest of all, and it represents heaven. In the holy place, in the tabernacle, and in the old temple was the ark. What is an ark? Simply a box or a chest. I think 202 times that Hebrew word is used, and all but on 2 occasions. Every time he's talking about the Ark of the Covenant. Another time was when Joseph, when he died, they put him in a box. It said they put him in an ark, same word, but we know that's just a casket, a box, a casket. And then later on, when Solomon built the temple, Solomon had a box built and poked a hole in it and set it outside for everybody to bring donations, and stuff that box with donations for the building of the temple. It was full every day, and they had to keep emptying it because the people were just kept giving and giving to build this temple. But that chest or that box for the money and Joseph's casket are the only two times that word out of 202 times. That's the only time it's not talking about the Ark of the Covenant or the box of the covenant. Simply, it was a box that held the covenant. And the covenant was the 2 tables of stone. The 10 Commandments were in there, but they just represented the larger covenant. The 2 tables of stone weren't the only part of that covenant, were they? But above that box, sitting on top of it, there was the mercy seat. And that mercy seat had an angel on both sides facing inward, and their wings went like this, touching each other at the top, just showing God's angelic presence, protecting this mercy seat and the Ark of the Covenant. And at that mercy seat, that's where God's presence was represented. And so that's why only the high priest could go in, because no one was allowed to see God and live. And the presence, it was called Shekinah, is that bright glow, like Moses when he came down from the mountain, was glowing like great. They couldn't even look at him because he was glowing so bright. That was God's presence. Anyway, and that represents heaven, where Jesus is sitting at the right hand of God now, and that's where the covenant is. He made the new covenant. So all this was a shadow of things to come, and he's going to describe the shadow first, and then he's going to describe the real thing here in the book of Hebrews. So now that we've looked at what this tabernacle was, here's the description of the old one. He says the first part, in which was the lampstand, the table, and the showbread. You all remember that picture, that part. It was the holy place, which is called the sanctuary. So it was called sanctuary. It was called the holy place, and it's interesting. What is a sanctuary? Okay, I mean that's essentially what it is, but it's a place set apart. We get the word saint from that same word that they get sanctuary from. It's sanctified or set apart, just like a saint. It's where the saints are. That's another reason for knowing that holy place represented the church, because that's where the saints are. So that's the holy place. And behind the second veil, as you proceeded through that veil, there was the part of the tabernacle, which is called the holiest of all, the most holy place, the Holy of Holies, which had the golden censer and the Ark of the Covenant overlaid on all sides with gold in which were the golden pot that had the manna, Aaron's rod that budded, and the tablets of the covenant. And so in this part of it was the Ark of the Covenant. And at this time, the time of the tabernacle that he's describing, there were three things in there. The manna, they had preserved a cup or a container of the manna to put it in there, and God kept it preserved. And Aaron's rod that budded, one of the miracles that happened when Aaron and Moses were starting this whole covenant thing, and the tablets themselves, the tablets of the covenant, the law that was made and that everybody agreed to, making it a bilateral covenant. You do this, I'll do this. And yes, we will. Everybody agreed. So there's a covenant, and above it were the cherubim of glory overshadowing the mercy seat, which I just described. Of these things, we cannot now speak in detail. It says, I'm not going to explain all about it. If you want the details on it, you go back to Exodus and Deuteronomy, where it is described in minute detail. He says, I'm not talking about that now. But before we go on, I wanted to notice, I put this First Kings passage in there. When they were making the temple, God said, and there I have made a place for the ark in which the covenant of the Lord is, which he made with our fathers when he brought them out of the land of Egypt. So we need to keep in mind that the covenant is the agreement that was made between the children of Israel and God, this pact that they both agreed to. And keep in mind, it wasn't just two tablets of stone. This was a promise. God made a promise. They made a promise. What happened was they didn't keep their part of the promise, which necessitated this new one coming up. Anyway, he goes, now, when these things had been thus prepared, the priests always went into the first part of the tabernacle, which is called the sanctuary, the holy place. They went into the first part of the tabernacle performing the services. But into the second part, the most holy place, the high priest went alone once a year, and not without blood, which he offered for himself and for the people's sins committed in ignorance. The Holy Spirit indicating this, that the way into the holiest of all was not yet manifest while the first tabernacle was still standing. Notice it's interesting. The Hebrew writer says that this offering was for the sins of the people committed in ignorance. What about the sins of the people that they knew about?
Was that the blood sacrifices?
That was the sacrifices that they made. Whenever they committed a sin, they would make whatever sacrifice that was stipulated in the old covenant. And so those were taken care of as they happened. I mean, assuming the person acknowledged that he had sinned and wanted to make it right with God, he would bring a sacrifice, and the priests would offer that sacrifice for him. But just like now, people commit sins without even realizing it. They do it in ignorance. They don't do it on purpose. They just either don't know they shouldn't do that yet. I haven't gotten to that place yet, or whatever. But those need to be taken care of too. And since they hadn't been, no sacrifice had been offered for them during the year, once a year, then the high priest made atonement for all the sins that people had committed without even realizing it. That makes it important to understand that just because you don't realize you're sinning doesn't mean God doesn't know you are. And so it makes it kind of incumbent on us to learn as much as we can. The more we learn, the more we perfect our lives, the more we realize here's what God wants, here's what God doesn't want. But God cares about those sins that are committed in ignorance. That's the point that we need to see. But he says the Holy Spirit indicating this, that the way into the holiest of all was not yet made manifest while the first tabernacle was still standing. I wrote on the side there that we knew how the high priest could get in there to the holy place, the dwelling place of God, but it hadn't been told how everybody else could get in. And that's where the new covenant comes in. In the old covenant, nobody could. You could not get access to God directly. It had to be through the high priest. So, but this statement implies that there was a way into the most holy place. It just hadn't been revealed yet while this thing was still standing. So he says it was symbolic for the present time. Talk about the present time for him, 67 AD, whatever. It was symbolic for the present time in which both gifts and sacrifices are offered, which cannot make him who performed the service perfect in regard to the conscience. They did the sacrifices, and it was the best they could do, but it didn't clear them of the actual guilt of the sin. It put them forward. It kept God appeased, so to speak. But only one thing could pay the price for their sins, and that was their own death, spiritual death, or Jesus. Another perfect sacrifice had to come along, because as we're going to see, these sacrifices couldn't do it. But I'm getting ahead of myself here, but bottom line is these gifts and sacrifices couldn't make you have a perfect conscience, because you still carried the guilt of that sin. You could look forward to the Messiah coming and making everything right, taking those sins away. But while that was happening, they couldn't have a good conscience completely. Verse 10 says, concerned only with food and drinks and various washings and fleshly ordinances imposed until the time of Reformation. So all these sacrifices and the offerings that they made, if you want to know about them, you got to go back to Exodus and Leviticus, where those things are talked about in detail, these offerings that you could make, the things that you had to do, the ordinances that were imposed, the sacrifices. If you do this, you've got to bring a dove for a sacrifice, or a lamb without blemish, or all these ordinances were just piled on the people, and impress them with the fact that God cares how you live. But they were just there until a certain time. And that certain time was what he calls the time of Reformation. We have a little bit different idea of Reformation than what is going to be conveyed here in just a second. When we think of Reformation, what do we think of? Pardon?
Reform.
Okay, and change. It's not just change. What kind of change is it? Going back to the old thing. We've gotten off track, and we need to, you go to reform school. We don't have those anymore, I guess, but back in my mom's day, they had reform schools. If a guy became recalcitrant, which is another word we don't use, but if he caused a problem, was stirring up trouble, they would send him off to what they called reform school. The idea was to get them back to behaving like they should. Well, that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. But here, I want us to look at this description of the time of Reformation. What it means in the Bible is restoring to its natural and normal condition something that has gotten out of line. Now, Hippocrates used this word when he would talk about fixing a broken, setting a broken leg or misshapen limbs. if they got dislocated or whatever, you get them back into the shape they're supposed to be in. Now, Hippocrates, remember the Hippocratic Oath? What's that deal with?
Medicine.
With medicine, and it is do no harm. That's part of the Hippocratic Oath is first of all, whatever I do, I'm going to do more damage than what's already been done. Anyway, he's noted for being one of the first physicians, I guess you would say, at least that wrote stuff about it. Anyway, he used that word talking about setting broken bones. But what had gotten broken? I mean, the law was broken, but what was it that really was broken? If you go all the way back to Adam, right? You go all the way back to Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve were just communing in the garden with God. You just would walk around, they would commune with one another. Then what happened? They ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They broke God's law, which is a transgression of, they sinned, transgression of God's law. Sin separates man from God. That communal, lovely relationship between God and man was broken right in the Garden of Eden, and it never was fully restored until Christ came. So Adam messed up this beautiful relationship, but now through the blood of the Lamb, as I said, Jesus, that through the blood of the Lamb, Jesus, that communal relationship can be restored and we can be reconciled with God. And so for all this time, from Adam down to Jesus, you couldn't have that perfect relationship with God simply because there's no way to have your sins forgiven until Jesus came along and was the Lamb without blemish. So the time of Reformation is the time when God puts everything back the way it was supposed to be in the beginning. Me and you, God, we're in relationship with each other, a communal relationship. Don't have to go through priests anymore. It's just you and me. We are in a beautiful relationship together. And so that's what the Reformation that he's talking about here. Until that time came, then they had all the rules and laws and the offerings and the gifts and everything else that they did and either had to do or did by volunteer to show their love for God. And but notice what he says next. But Christ came as high priest of the good things to come with the greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands. So we just had the old tabernacle, the old covenant described for us. Now he's going to describe the new one. Christ is now the high priest of good things to come with greater and more perfect tabernacle. These are two comparative terms. Comparing the old tabernacle with the new tabernacle. This new tabernacle, not made with hands. It's not this building. It's something that's out of the physical realm. It's the church. It's the dwelling place of God. Jesus was told to be called Emmanuel, which means God with us. God is in our presence when we gather together. And so he was high priest of the good things, this tabernacle not made with hands, that is not of this creation, not a physical thing, not with the blood of bulls and goats and calves. When this new high priest comes along, Jesus, he didn't come with the blood of bulls and goats and calves. So we have a contrast here. It's not with bulls and goats blood, but instead with his own blood. He entered the most holy place once and for all, having obtained eternal redemption. And so when he shed his own blood, that's what he took to the most holy place, which is heaven. That's the sacrifice that brought forgiveness to anyone who would want to take advantage of it. He did that once and for all, not every day, not once a year like the priests did for their sacrifices. Once and for all, one time is all it needed, because his sacrifice was perfect, and he was able to, by that sacrifice, able to not just push the sins forward, but to do away with them, to have us totally forgiven. God said, I will remember their sins no more. They're gone. And so his own blood, he obtained eternal redemption. Barbara?
He entered the most holy place. That's when the curtain was rent from the top to the bottom, right?
Well, when Christ, I view the entering into the most holy place was when he ascended into heaven. At the ascension, that's when he went up and entered the holy place. The tearing of the veil of the temple.
Two laws and two.
Well, let me just go back and look at the picture. This veil of the temple, it was like 120 feet tall. It was like a 12-story building tall. It was 4 inches thick and as wide as the whole thing. And it tore from top to bottom. It'd be like, you seen guys, well, maybe younger ones. These guys used to tear phone books in half, big thick phone book that could rip it in half. Wow, that's pretty impressive. Well, imagine this whole 4 inch thick curtain just tearing by itself from top to bottom. Top to bottom means it's coming from above, nobody is ripping it from below. God's doing it, and what it did was it opened the way to the most holy place. In the sacrifice that Jesus made, it opened the way for us to go into the most holy place, which is heaven. And so that's what that represented. But
I just thought too, it could represent the split. With Christ dying at that time, split of the old laws done and the new laws.
well, yeah, it did represent that too as well. I mean, just the fact that it was undoing something, access into the most holy place. You didn't have that in the old law. And so it did represent doing away with the old law as well. Gene?
Must have been some way for the high priest to enter that most holy place, an opening of some sort.
Yeah, it was a curtain, just like you used to see Johnny Carson. You see the curtain going like this, and then he'd come out, and then everybody would laugh. Yeah, it didn't look like there was a place, but there was, and he just was trying to find it from behind. Well, that's the same with this curtain. There was a way through, but you couldn't see past it. You had to open the opening, and the high priest was the only one that could do that. So nobody ever saw the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat except for the high priest. But anyway, getting back to where we are right now. Okay, he went in once and for all, having obtained eternal redemption. What is redemption? It means to buy back. We had sold ourselves to sin, sold ourselves to the devil. We had no way of buying it back. No, the price was death. But Jesus, with his own blood, he paid the price. He bought us back. And that word propitiation that we keep talking about, he didn't just buy us back. He was the price. He was what his life, his blood was what it cost. That was the price for our forgiveness. And by doing that, he obtained not just getting us back in relationship with God for a few moments, but eternal redemption. we are back together with God forever, which is an encouraging thing if you think about it. Then in verse 13, he says, for, and he's going to be describing why Jesus' sacrifice was superior. He says, if, that's a condition, if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer, sprinkling the unclean, sanctifies for the purifying of the flesh, if that happened, if that was true, which it was, it purified the people, didn't make them perfect, but it purified them, kept them right with God for the time being until the Messiah would come. If that was true, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot, how much more should that cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? All this, the physical sacrifices, the blood of the bulls and goats, they could do so much, but how much more this sacrifice of Jesus could cleanse us, and notice he says, cleanse your conscience. Finally, for the first time, you could be totally free of sin. It wasn't just cast ahead. We even now can ask for forgiveness. A person that's never obeyed the gospel yet can be baptized into Christ, confessing Jesus, repenting of their sins. They're baptized. The old man's dying. We go into the laver, come back out, raised together to walk in newness of life, now in the holy place, which is the church. And but then you can truly say God has set those sins apart. He's not going to bring them up anymore. As far as the east is from the west, that's how far your sins are separated from you. And so we can, starting after Jesus, we can truly be forgiven and feel forgiven. If you don't feel forgiven as a Christian, you don't understand what this sacrifice of Jesus did. And so whenever we pray for, we beat ourselves up when we mess up and repent and pray, and it's hard to let go. It's hard to let go of that guilt. But when we can do that, that's where true happiness is. God's given it up. Why don't we? Okay, so verse 15. Oh, Gene, did you have a?
Died under the old law and kept to the best of their ability. They will be saved. Will they
Yeah.
not?
Yeah. The children of Israel, they had a specific law given to them and specific things. Everybody else that weren't under the law of Moses, they would be under what you would call the law of conscience. And in Acts chapter 17, verse 30, it says, talking about, the people that weren't Jewish folks, worshiping idols and all that kind of stuff. It says the times of this ignorance God overlooked. So there was a lot of stuff that those folks did that God overlooked. What would have been the important part was where their heart was and what they knew. Remember when Adam ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that brought knowledge of good and evil to all of us. We have an innate sense of morality, what is good and evil. We don't have a specific whole bunch of set of laws, but we know right and wrong. I mean, a little child, when he's dipping into the candy and you say, Junior, they know. We all have that, and it's how everyone lived according to that innate knowledge. I guess you say the knowledge of good and evil. What you did with that, that's what would be the basis of judgment. As long as they were living, the best they could, then Jesus' blood would cleanse them of all unrighteousness as well. Okay, well, our time's up. So before I go any further into Hebrews 9, he's going to continue. This is why. Here's the reason that he's the mediator of a new covenant. It was to bring in total forgiveness. So anyway, we'll talk about that next week as we go on. All right, thanks for questions. Thank you for your attention, and we'll be back together again in 15 minutes. Chapter 8, verses 27 and 28, where Paul says, "Now he who searches the hearts knows what the mind of the Spirit is, because he makes intercession for the saints according to the will of God. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, who are called according to his purpose." This morning lesson is the story of Joseph. It's a story of betrayal and forgiveness, and an example of what we just read, all things working together for good. I'm not going to read, I'd have to read about 5 chapters out of the book of Genesis in order to read the story of Joseph. So I'm just going to talk about the first part, and then we'll read some of the scriptures that, towards the end of the events that we're talking about in Joseph's life. Joseph, in his early life, he was one of 12 children, one of 12 sons. He was second to the last. He was one of 2 children born to Rachel. Isaac had, Jacob had numerous wives. First one was Leah. Had to work 7 years to get permission to, he thought he was going to marry Rachel, but instead the father gave him Leah. So he had to work 7 more years to get Rachel. Anyway, the first children were born to Leah, and I'm not going to go into the whole story, but a couple others. And then Rachel had 2 children, Joseph being the first one. And since she was the favorite wife of Jacob, Joseph became the favorite son. Now, whether it's right to have a favorite son or not, you can debate that. Probably not a particularly good idea. makes the other ones jealous, and that's exactly what happened. Part of being Jacob's favorite son included the coat of many colors, which we all remember hearing about. And Jacob, how he got it, we don't know. We do know that there were travelers, merchants that came through back and forth between Egypt and the Near East, going right through Palestine. So perhaps he bought it from one of those merchants. Anyway, bottom line is he got Joseph a coat, but not the other guys. And as you might expect, it made them a bit on the jealous side. They weren't really too happy about that. Well, that insult or injury, one day when Joseph was 17 years old, just a young kid, 17 years old, his brothers were out keeping the flocks out in the wilderness area. As everyone knows about sheep, they eat the grass right down to where there's nothing. You have to keep them moving. And so wherever you start, the shepherd lets them eat there for a while, and then he has to move them to other places. So these guys were moving all over the place, miles and miles apart, actually. Anyway, they were out there doing that. And Jacob said to Joseph, hey, you go out there and check up on your brothers. So he sent Joseph, 17-year-old kid, out there looking for his brothers wherever they were keeping their sheep. And he did that, and took him a while to find it. But when he did find them, he found out they were doing okay. But he said, you know, but guys, I had this dream last night, and there were these sheaves of wheat, 12 of them, and 11 of them were bowing down to one. The one was standing in the middle. And he represented that he was the one in the middle. Needless to say, we're not going to be bowing down to you, Joseph. You're our little brother. There's no way that's going to happen. Well, he also had another dream that he saw the sun, moon, and stars, and they were bowing down to his star. And they were flabbergasted that even Jacob said, hey, you're out of line here, kid. Your mom and dad are not the sun and the moon were the mom and pop in this dream. And you know, you're going way beyond your limits there. Everybody was jealous. Well, Jacob let it slide because he was the favorite son, but the brothers weren't quite so magnanimous about it. While he was out there, after he had told them those dreams, they said, that's enough. We've had it with this guy, favorite of our father. We're tired of being second on the list. They took him and they threw him in a pit that was out there in the wilderness, threw him in this pit. And the intentions of most of them were that they were going to kill him. But they left him in this pit for a while. But Reuben was the oldest brother, and he thought, nah, we really shouldn't be killing him. I'm going to go back a little bit later, take him out and send him home. Well, before he could do that, a band of these merchants from Ishmaelites were traveling through with their camels, and the brothers decided, you know, we probably shouldn't kill him, but let's sell him to these merchants, and he can be a slave somewhere. We'll just keep his coat. We'll stain it with blood from some animal, and then we'll go back and tell our dad, oh, an animal killed him, and then they're rid of Joseph without actually having to kill him. But they sold him off into slavery to these Ishmaelite traders. Sent him off. Their own little brother sold him into slavery. Well, he was taken down into Egypt. And down in Egypt, he probably went to an auction, a slave auction, and he was purchased by a man called Potiphar, who was the head of the army of Egypt. And so a man of high position, and he became a slave to Potiphar, but God was blessing him, and Potiphar could see this guy's sharp guy, even though he's only 18 years old or so. And so he found favor, and Joseph was going up the ladder really fast at Potiphar's house. But then Potiphar had a wife, and part of Joseph's job apparently was ministering to the wife, going into her chamber and making the bed, or I don't know what. But he was in there, and he must have been a handsome guy, because this woman took a shine to him and wanted to have him for her affair, I guess, for lack of a better term. She was telling him, look, I want you to be my lover. And what he said to that was, how then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Last week we were talking about sin and sinning against man. All sin is ultimately against God. And here's just another case of someone understanding that fact. He didn't say, how can I do this and sin against you by committing adultery? Or how can I sin against my boss, Potiphar? He said, how can I sin against God? This shows a bit about the character of Joseph. He loved God. He cared about God. He said, I'm not going to sin against him. And he tried to leave. She grabbed his coat, and he just sloughed himself off out of it to get out of there. She's standing there holding the coat. She was angry that he rebuffed her. And so she started shouting out that he had tried to force her, and thinking, well, if I can't have him, then he needs to be punished. So she made this lie. And so Joseph went before a court, and Potiphar then threw him in prison. So now Joseph had gone to be a slave, which is bad enough, but now he's just plain in prison, which is even worse than being a slave. But while he was in prison, he met these two guys that happened to show up in prison. The king had lost favor with these two guys. We don't know what they did. One was the butler or the cupbearer. The other one was a baker. All we have to do is know that the pharaohs or any king, they can do whatever they want. They can have whatever they want. Maybe he burned the toast. The baker burned the toast or whatever. Anyway, he got thrown in prison. The butler, we don't know what he did. He was the wine taster. All these kings would have somebody that would taste it first, and if they didn't die, then it was okay for the king to drink it. Somehow he got out of favor, so they both were thrown in jail in this prison with Jacob. They ended up, both of them, having a dream, and when they had this dream, they came to Joseph, and he said, "Why are you so sad looking?" And he goes, "Well, we've had these dreams, and we don't know how to interpret them." And here's what Joseph said: "Do not interpretations belong to God?" Again, showing his character, showing his trust and his faith in God. God's the only one that can know anything about dreams. And then he set about to show them the interpretation that God had given them. The one, the butler had dreamed about a grapevine that grew up, and the blossoms blew up and then turned into little grapes, and then they grew into big grapes and became ripe. And then he squeezed the grapes and gave it to the king. That was his dream. And the other one dreamed about 3 loaves of bread and the birds coming and eating the top loaf. And Joseph said, "Your dream," well, first of all, he said to the butler, "Your dream means that in 3 days, there's 3 branches on this vine. So in 3 days, you're going to go back and be reinstated with the Pharaoh." To the baker, he said, "Well, the bread, 3 loaves of bread represents 3 days, and in 3 days, you're going to have your head, you're going to lose your life. The king is going to put you to death." And sure enough, that exactly thing happened. And when he was talking to the butler, he had said, "Now, things are going to go well for you. You're going to go back, and when you do, hey, put a word in for me. Here I am down here in prison for an unjust cause. put a word with the Pharaoh for me. Well, this butler went back, but he forgot about Joseph. He didn't say anything to the Pharaoh. But then what begins Joseph's rise to power, while he was there in prison, Pharaoh had a dream. Actually, he had two dreams. One was about these 7 fat cows being eaten up by 7 skinny cows. And the other dream was these 7 luscious bunches of wheat being devoured by these scrawny, unproductive ones. Had no idea what in the world could this possibly mean. None of his soothsayers or wise people could interpret the dream. And so he was dismayed about that. And his butler said to him, "Oh yeah, this is kind of a bad deal. I was supposed to talk to you about this, but there's this guy down in prison. While I was down there after you threw me down there, I met this guy and he interpreted our dreams, and they came true just like he said. He said by this interpretation. So Pharaoh sent for him, and Joseph interpreted the dreams, and the dreams meant that there was going to be 7 years of just plenty. The crops would be abundant for 7 years, and then after that there would be 7 years of famine where nothing was produced. And so Joseph said, what we need to do is, what you need to do, Pharaoh, is get somebody to oversee this and get storehouses and fill them full of grain so that we'll have food during the famine. And Pharaoh said, and I'm paraphrasing all this, and Pharaoh said to him, okay, you're the guy. I'm going to put you over this whole thing. And so Joseph became second in command only to the Pharaoh. And whatever he said, everybody had to do. They collected and collected and collected all this wheat, stuck it, built storehouses, filled them out full. And then when the famine came, then they had food to eat. So Joseph had become second in command to the Pharaoh of Egypt. Well, I should have been advancing these as I was going, but they filled up their containers, their warehouses, their bins full of grain so that they would have it when the famine came. And then the famine did come. And when the famine came, it wasn't just in Egypt, but it was all over the world about them, including Palestine. Or at that time, it was the land of Canaan, where Jacob and his family lived. Anyway, people came from all over to buy. First of all the people, the residents of Egypt, they didn't have food to eat, so they came to the king and says, we want to buy food from you. So as long as they had money, they would buy it, but then when they ran out of money, they started giving them their land. So this king became rich. He not only had all the money available, but he had land like he never dreamed of having. And then people from all over the world around came and brought money and bought from them as well. And among those people were Jacob's family. Jacob sent his sons, all the sons, 10 of them, except for he kept Benjamin at home, the youngest kid, sent the 10 brothers down to Egypt to buy. So when they came to buy, they brought money, and Joseph sold them, but they didn't recognize him. You can see by what he was, the clothes that he was wearing didn't look anything like a Jew. His face, most hair and everything mostly covered up. They didn't recognize him. Plus he was older, several years older. He'd been in jail for at least 2 years. So he was at least 21 or 2 years old probably by this time. They didn't recognize him, but he recognized them, and he didn't do anything at first. He kind of gave them a couple of tests to see what their character was. And ultimately, he made them go back home, come back with Benjamin. They didn't want to bring Benjamin because they knew that would make Jacob very happy, but they made him bring back Benjamin. And when they did, he revealed himself. And this is what we're going to read about right now. In Genesis chapter 43, Joseph had been out tending to business. He came back home and his brothers were there. They brought him the present which was in their hand into the house, and they bowed down before him to the earth. They didn't know who he was. Then he asked them about their well-being. And he said, is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke? Just showing concern. He was really wanting to know about his father, if he was still alive. Is he still alive? And they answered, your servant, our father, is in good health. He is still alive. And they bowed down their heads and prostrated themselves. Look, we are at your mercy. We need food from you. Well, then he lifted his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin. This is his brother by the same mother. They'd been really close. He saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, is this your younger brother whom you spoke to me? And he said, God be gracious to you, my son. He really talked to his brother, but his brother didn't know it yet. Then it says about Joseph, now his heart yearned for his brother. So Joseph made haste and sought somewhere to weep. He couldn't take it anymore. Seeing his little brother, he went off into a chamber and wept there. And then he washed his face and came out. So knowing who these guys were, he was so happy to see them that he had to go someplace and cry because he didn't want them to see him just yet. Didn't want them to see him cry, at least. Then Joseph couldn't restrain himself before all those who stood by him, all his attendants. Being the second in command, he had attendants of his own now, and he couldn't restrain himself before all those who stood by him. And he cried out, make everyone go out for me. Get out. I want to be alone with these guys. So he told them all to get out. So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. Joseph wanted this to be a private thing. And he wept aloud. He cried out loud, and the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard it. That's how loud he cried. His attendants that he had just kicked out, they could hear it from the next room. And they ended up telling the whole household of Pharaoh, man, Joseph's in there crying. I don't know what's going on. But then Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Does my father still live, really? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed. And that word dismayed, the English translation here doesn't do it justice. What it means is what I put in parentheses there. They were shaking in their boots. Literally, it's shaking in their bones. But they were scared. They couldn't answer. This is Joseph, are you serious? And they were scared to death. Why do you think they would be scared? Well, we all know why. They had sold him into slavery, caused him all the trouble that he had gone through. So they were scared. Joseph said to his brothers, please come near to me. Come on, get over here. So they came near. What else are they going to do? They came near, and then he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. You can just imagine what they're thinking right now. But here's what he said. But now, do not therefore be grieved nor angry with yourselves, because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. So Joseph's reaction wasn't, look, you guys sold me into slavery, so guess what? You're going into slavery, or you're going to have your heads off your bodies, whatever. But instead, he said, no, guys, it's okay. This was God's doing. There was no payback. Joseph did not do one thing to pay back what they had done to him. All the misery that they had caused him, he forgave them. No payback, no vindictiveness, no tit for tat, vengeance, none of that. Just love. He loved him He loved his brothers. How did he do all this? Would you have done it like that? Or would you have gotten your revenge? I know what I would have done. I don't like that. Think about what I would have done, but if I was in that position, the second highest in command, they would have gotten something for all their betrayal. How he did it was his love for and trust for God. We saw during this story, he kept saying, God, God, God. I can't betray God. It would be awful for me to betray God. And God is the one that interprets dreams. It's all about God. His relationship with God, his trust in God is what got him able to forgive. So I want to talk just for a minute about the truth about forgiveness. We talked a little bit about it last week, but Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free." When you know the truth about forgiveness, that's the only time that you can truly feel forgiven and truly forgive others. Satan, what he's doing, he's the father of lies, and he's trying to destroy your relationship with God. That's what he wants to do. He wants to destroy your relationship with God. And what he says about situations like this, he says, you can't let this go. They need to be punished. You got to do something. That's what Satan is saying on one shoulder. On the other hand, God is saying, vengeance is mine. I will recompense. He says, I've got this. I'll take care of it. You let it go. Because sin is against me. I'll take care of it. You just need to let it go. And that's what forgiveness literally means. The word for forgiveness literally means to send away. Whatever they've done to you, just send it away. Act like it didn't happen. No, just like Joseph, no recrimination, no vengeance. God will take care of it. That's the truth about forgiveness. God's the only one that can forgive. It can absolve them of their guilt. You can't, even if you said, I forgive you, you can't absolve them of guilt. But what you can do is forgive in the sense of sending it away. Get out of here, sin. As far as me and you are concerned, this never happened. Just sending away. I'm not gonna take revenge for it. What we do is like Joseph did, let God's love replace the bitterness in your heart, and then you can heal. Whatever damage has been done, the only way it can be healed is through God's love and forgiveness. You can't do anything about it. You just have to let it go and let God heal you. Here's an illustration from the physical side of life. Say you got a bad wound. You get a cut somehow right down to the bone. Well, if you neglect it, that wound ends up getting full of pus and it festers and turns into gangrene, and then keep letting it go and you die. That's what happens when you neglect an injury that happens to you in the physical sense. What you need to do is heal it. And to heal it, what you have to do is go through the pain of getting it stitched up and apply the healing salve. It's not fun to go to the doctor and have him stick a needle in you 17 times or whatever, sew that up. But compared to the alternative, it's what you have to do. When someone sins against you, it's not fun to forgive, to just let it go. That's hard. They need to be taken care of. Well, yeah, God will take care of it, but you have to go through the pain of just letting it go. And the healing salve in this illustration is God's love and forgiveness. Just let God's love be applied to your wound, and that will let it heal. That's the only way it can heal. It takes time. It doesn't happen just overnight. But you got to let it have time to do its job. When you let an injury go that somebody does to you, you don't forget it. It's always there, but I'm just not going to react in a negative way. I'm not going to hold them accountable for it. I'm just going to go on with my life and let God's love heal me. You got to let it do its job. And it may leave a scar. Just like a physical injury leaves a scar sometimes. Anybody injures you, sins against you some way, it may leave a scar. Every time you see that, every time something happens, it reminds you of it, but you don't have to do anything about it. It's gone. So now to the part of Romans 8:28. It says, we know that all things work together for good to those who love God. Joseph was an example of that. Crummy things happened to him. He was thrown into a pit, and then he was sold into slavery. Then he was accused of rape. Then he was thrown in prison and in prison for years before anything good happened. And then finally, he was raised up to be second in command to the Pharaoh of Egypt. And it saved not only his life, but his family's life from this famine that came up years after he ever got thrown in prison. And that's what he said, this is God's doing. I'm not going to hold it against you brothers, because God worked it all together for our good, to save our lives. Notice it doesn't say that all things are good. The stuff that Joseph had happen to him, a lot of it was bad stuff. But God was able to work it together, work everything together for his good and the good of his family. With the love of God, we will think properly. Why did Joseph say, no, I can't commit adultery with you? I can't do this against God, sin against God. He had love for God, so he thought properly, and he acted properly. Even though he got thrown in prison for it, everything still worked out for him. So when we love God, we'll make better decisions. We'll make right decisions. We'll think better and act better if we base everything that we do on our love for God. And God will work things around. Bad things will happen to us, yes, but God will work it around to our ultimate good. And so that's the lesson of Joseph: forgiveness and all things working together for good. This time we're going to sing a song. It's really a song that should be sung at night, I guess. It says, now the day is over. But since we don't have an evening worship service, we don't get together at night. We're singing this one now, and it's a prayer. And as we sing this song, think about the prayer, and think of it as a prayer that you're talking to God as we sing this song. And if you're here and you need God's forgiveness, by all means, take advantage of it. And if you don't know how, talk to some of us, and we can help you out with that. But for now, just think about this song and pray the prayer that is in this song. Now the day is over.